Welcome everyone! Today I need to fix this router. I bought this router back in 2017 because it is basically the only router available in Germany with a cylindrical body that can take 12mm and 1/2 inch shanks and that doesn't have any nonsense going on with it, like having the switch on the handle of the base, which of course renders the router motor completely useless once you take it out of its base, which is not all that great. Because what a router like this really lends itself to is building jigs and fixtures for it and putting it into homemade machines. And I was planning on building a custom router lift for it and maybe also putting it into like a slot mortiser. But I never did all of that because, as it turns out, the fixed base that comes with this router is already an excellent router lift. So this router used to live its life in my router table in a dusty environment, spinning heavy cutters and one time even milling cast iron. And I used to be really happy with it. It is an excellent router. But over the course of the last year or so, it got progressively louder and louder, and it also started to vibrate, and the quality of cut also really started to suffer, at least in my perception. And a couple of weeks ago I got really fed up and I looked at what the problem was, and sure enough, the main bearing is shot. And as you can tell, there is way too much play in this bearing. And in order to swap those bearings, I'll have to pull the entire thing apart, which means separating the rotor from the stator. And so the first thing that has to come out are the brushes. And let's put those aside. And the next logical step is to remove the top cover. It's a little bit dusty in there, but that's to be expected. And now the next layer of screws. Props to the designers, by the way, for using as many different screw drives as possible. I don't know why they all seem to do that, and it annoys the hell out of me. Anyway, now that thing will still not come out. And after a bit of fiddling and prying, I found the obstacle. The little tachometer wheel that lets the computer tell how fast the router is running and up the voltage when the machine slows down under load. And this way it can keep its speed constant. And another obstacle. I first thought that these wires were for a temperature sensor to monitor the temperature of the stator, but as it turns out, these lead to the LEDs that will blind you when you have the thing in a router table, and that were subsequently blocked with duct tape. And now the entire thing comes out as one package. And I think this is actually kind of a smart way of constructing a motor. Interesting. This is now just an empty shell. In order to remove the rotor, you need a 3/8 hex wrench to restrain the spindle and loosen that spindle collar nut thing. And then remove this O-ring. I'm not sure what this is good for. If anybody knows, please tell me in the comments. And now the rotor pops right out. Beautiful fan there, by the way. And it looks like it was properly balanced. And down there is that faulty bearing. And I'm just gonna tap this out with a hammer. It rattles and has plastic spacers instead of a cage, and it is completely dry. And to be on the safe side, I also replaced the rear bearing. Couldn't get this off without a gear puller. And almost breaking the fan. And here are the new bearings. So, fun fact, these bearings that I'm about to install were not rated for this kind of speed, and they ended up getting really hot. And I had to start all over again, and I replaced them with some shielded bearings that are in fact rated for this kind of speed. And I'm gonna put the specifications somewhere on the screen. These shielded bearings don't seal as well, but I'm pretty sure that they're gonna be fine this time. And I press the rear bearing on with my vise. Of course, only applying force to the inner race, so not to damage the bearing. And then I pressed in the front bearing, not taking as much care, but it worked. And then I put everything back together, which went very smoothly. There were no weird distortions or anything. And now this is very important. When you put a screw back into plastic, always turn it backwards until you hear a click. This makes sure that the screw will find its way back into its original thread and will not cut a new one over the old one, which would very likely cause it to strip out the thread, which would be a huge pain to repair. So this is important. I remembered that the dark ridge on the brushes pointed into the direction of rotation, so I put them back in that way. And amazingly, there were no parts left, which basically means I must have lost some on the floor. And the moment of truth. Nothing. And sure enough, this switch is not working. There's probably some dust in there that keeps the contact from closing. So I simply ordered a new one. I should probably put some sort of protective silicone cover over it, but I couldn't come up with a clever idea. But if you have one, please feel free to share it in the comments. And now for some test cuts. Here, quite a heavy cut in spruce using a raised panel bit. I would recommend making a cut like this in multiple passes, but I just wanted to put that thing through its paces and show what it's capable of. And that surface is just beautiful. And let's see how it fares with some really hard beach. And that was too much. It just shut itself off to protect itself, which is good. And it came right back on. As I said, I would normally do this in at least 2 passes. But again, that surface is gorgeous. And now the router is finally back in action and it works as well as it used to. And that's wonderful. Have a good one, everyone.